Hey folks, welcome back to Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. We're doing some extra credit today, and if you're reading along with us, we'll be sending you some extra credit points in the mail shortly. Just hold still, hold tight for those. But we're reading this book, Who Gets In and Why: A Year Inside College Admissions by Jeffrey Salingo. And we want to talk in this segment about early decision. And I want to read just this brief snippet from the chapter Playing the Odds, which is all about ED. It says, yes, ED provides certainty for students, but the practice largely benefits colleges because early applicants never find out whether they would have been accepted to another top choice school or if a different college might have offered more financial aid. That seems to me to be sort of the crux of what he's arguing in this chapter. And I think it's something that families never really consider. They think ED is an advantage for me, the student. I'm going to have a better shot of getting in. And so I have to find an ED school. Let's think about this not from the perspective of families to start with, but instead to think about it from the perspective of universities and why they have ED. And maybe, Shannon, you can start us off just from a finance perspective, the role that early decision plays. And then Sally, I'd love if you could just talk a little bit about ED from an admission and enrollment management standpoint.
Yeah, I would say from the financial standpoint, universities love having ED it helps them in terms of locking in a portion of their class. I'm going to, because I'm going to go beyond the financial part of it.
Sure.
But they love to accept students that they know are going to come because, of course, with early decision, you're making a commitment up front. If you accept me, I will enroll. That's a wonderful thing for a university to have what they call a high yield rate. Your yield is your percentage of students who you accept to actually enroll. A high yield makes a college look darn nice. It helps them move up in those U.S. News and World Report rankings. This is something that every college is after. From a financial perspective, it also allows them to lock in a good number of students who are not concerned about finances or not concerned about paying for college. Because when you make that early decision commitment, you are, again, guaranteeing the school you will come regardless of what kind of scholarship money they offer you. So it tends to be higher income folks, what in the college admissions and finance world, a lot of full pay students apply ED because students who are not full pay are unlikely to make that commitment up front because they want to be able to compare scholarship and financial aid offers among a number of schools to figure out the school that's going to work best for them. Students who apply ED, sort of the assumption and what tends to play out in fact is that you're not so worried about money.
And I think to sort of borrow from his terminology just about drivers and passengers,
yes.
Drivers tend to apply more often to ED than passengers by a huge margin. And drivers tend to come from families that are more well off. They're more engaged with and aware of the admission process. So there are fewer passengers applying ED, which means there are fewer low-income students applying ED, which means there are fewer students who need financial aid in the ED pool.
Correct.
And I think it's fair to say, like, if you're calculating yield, like you've got this huge span of unknown, the 300 seats you need to fill your freshman class. If you can make half of that class a known quantity, then you know how much money you have to play with for a smaller number of students, which is a nice sort of calculus to have to work on if you're an enrollment manager or financial aid office. Sally, what about from the admission side of the coin? What does ED sort of allow colleges to do?
I mean, I'm trying
Try not to get too carried away.
Control yourself, Sally.
I'm trying to be polite about this. I mean, I don't like ED. I'm going to be really clear about it. I will say that colleges at certain income levels, I don't think people realize that institutions like Whittier and Reed, to a lesser extent, I mentioned those two because I worked at them, they really don't have unlimited funds for their I mean, no place
That's
has
right.
unlimited funds, but they don't have enough, quite literally. And so everything has to be planned out so very carefully. And so ED really is a tool that in some cases might almost be needed for survival for that colleges. I mean, Selengo himself talks about the fact that, you know, there's something like 10 or 15 colleges are closing every year since the Great Recession. I mean, just a really like nutso figure. And while some of those colleges, it's probably fine that they're gone, in general, the loss of colleges like that is also another way that like lower income students, passengers have fewer options.
Yeah.
Right? A student
Yeah.
who might benefit from a smaller college with more handholding is then going to be thrown into the local public where maybe the graduation rate is literally 25% in some cases,
Yeah.
right? And then that's not necessarily a good situation. So I want to start by saying I had more sympathy. Like when I was at Reed, the early decision process made more sense to me. It was a challenging process, but I understood why we did it. And it did feel like because Reed was such a self-selective institution, we really were getting the right students applying early decision. I mean,
My experience too, Sally.
kids weren't applying to Reed because they thought it was going to give them some big leg up on Wall Street. You know, it's not that kind of an institution. On the other hand, at University of Chicago, when I was there, it was, we had frankly plenty of money. It was sort of amazing and wonderful to work for a school where we could have admitted more students who needed full rides and it would have been fine.
Yeah.
Like enough money was there. I mean, I'm sure that the president of the college would have argued with me, but like, let's face it, Chicago has enough cash. So does Columbia, so does UPenn, so does WashU, like, I mean, all these other schools. So when those colleges and Chicago, you know, has added 2 EDs at this point since I left, when those colleges add ED, they are really like they're not worried about survival. So they're just using it to please their trustees, to please the president of the college because he has to please the trustees so that they can say, look, my rank is now above UPenn's rank, or UPenn can say, no, our rank is, or if one college's rank, you know, declines, they're going to get a call from the president and from trustees. I mean, it literally felt to me like it came down to that because when I was at Chicago and we were admitting a much higher percentage than they admit now, we were still getting unbelievably great students. I mean, it was just, they were so strong. And so the need to kind of, you know, get students to commit to admit a much smaller percentage has nothing to do with having a greater quality of student at the institution. So in case anybody's wondering how I really feel, I really
Sally
think,
unfiltered. Yeah.
Yeah,
This is
I really
little extra credit.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I'm as critical. I'm really actually very, very pleased. I'll bring it back to the book. I'm very pleased that Selengo is critical of it and kind of lays bare what's going on. And he's not even, you know, talking as much about schools at that very, very, very top level. I mean, Emory's pretty close to it. You know, like, but really the students at the top level with these enormous endowments, there really is no reason that I think that they need this. They're not facing the reality that some of the other early decision schools are facing. So so that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, and I mean, you can see the idea of, I mean, just to sort of play with some numbers, right? So if you can lock in half of your class through an ED round, that's a much smaller pool of students. You have to admit a certain percentage that might be a little higher than your regular rate, but that's a smaller percentage of your overall applicant pool. And then you have the same number of seats, if you're admitting half the class, that need to be filled with 10 times as many applicants. And so when you're a family, you're looking at that and you're saying, wow, the admit rate at this school is 5 times higher. If I apply ED, I feel like I have to in order to get in. And I think that that's where the challenge is, right? So if Sally were Czarina of college admission, she could just say ED doesn't exist anymore, wave a wand and it's gone. But we do have to sort of live with this as a particular policy that colleges use. How does this understanding of what ED is all about affect family decisions? And to what extent can families sort of push back? Do we say, stop applying ED, that maybe it's not something that you should do for an individual family?
I mean, I do caution families very carefully that early action is good because it's non-binding. So I'm still pushing to students apply earlier than maybe they would like to, but I'm really careful with early decision to
Mhm.
say it has to be your top choice. But the downside is that this is really, I also have to be extremely honest that it is going to help them potentially. Honestly, though, let's be really clear. It's not going to help everybody. There are students who think that because they have B's instead of A's, they have to apply early decision or they won't get in. And I want to be really clear. If the school expects A's, you still have to have A's early decision. It just ups your odds among the students who have kind of the
Yes.
basic qualities that the school is looking for. So the downside of all this is that, I mean, I worked with a student in the fall who just, made every decision based on getting into a more prestigious school. And it didn't matter what kind of gentle messages I tried to give her, like none of that made it through.
Yeah.
It didn't matter. Like in the end, I was like, okay, fine, I'll help you with what you want to do. I'm not advising this, but here we are.
I think if
Yeah.
you follow that logic of getting into a more prestigious school, you're going to lean more on ED. Whereas if you take Solingo's sort of advice that you can be successful at a wider population of schools, I think ED becomes less interesting to you.
Yeah.
Because I say, well, why would I apply ED to Northwestern when I can apply to all these other schools, compare financial aid packages, and figure out the best offer for me?
Yeah.
Shannon, I mean, it also feels to me like, why is a student applying ED if they can't then negotiate aid, if they can't look at merit scholarships? Like, it feels like you have this, you've got this curtain in front of you that doesn't allow you to see what all the possibilities are.
Yep. From a neutral financial perspective, it's complete insanity. No one would ever do it. It is because colleges sell themselves as not a consumer good.
Right.
It's something else altogether. It's an experience, and particular colleges will sell themselves as an experience that cannot be recreated elsewhere. If you can imagine, think about any other purchase of this magnitude in terms of finances, a house or a car. Can you imagine walking into a car dealership and the dealer telling you, we've got a real special car for you? You can't actually experience it yet, first of all. So it's he talks about these experience goods that you don't actually know what you're getting until after the fact. So you don't really quite know what you're getting, but we guarantee you it's something you can't get elsewhere. You need this car or else, but here's the deal. You got to sign on the dotted line right now. We're not going to tell you what it costs up front. But you need to tell us right now that you're buying it, no matter what it costs. You are not allowed to go to any other dealer, see what they have to offer, see what their cars cost, and make an informed decision. It's really a way, from my perspective, it forces families into making uninformed decisions, which is the shameful part for me. Yeah. And he actually talks about in the book how students, some of these drivers that he's talking to know they're going to apply ED somewhere. They don't know where, but they're going to find a school to apply ED just because of the advantage it will give them.
That's the most challenging conversation I think that I have with families. If for a student to say, I haven't decided what my ED yet is, or I got to find my ED school. I think that one of the things that we can just push back on as counselors, as parents who are listening to this show, if you're talking to other parents, you do not need to apply ED anywhere. ED is not a natural part of this process. You can decide to forego that option entirely. And in many cases, you are in a better position not applying ED anywhere than you are applying ED somewhere, both from the financial perspective, but also from the standpoint of just your overall engagement with and understanding of what this process is and thinking about your possibilities. I mean, I said before we went on the air, I really don't like the term dream school. And I think that ED encourages that idea. What's your number one choice? All the conversations we have around college. Where do you want to go to college? What's your dream school? What's your top choice? We should really lean more into this idea of having a number of different options and possibilities and applying with our whole selves to all of those schools and then considering the best choice based on where we get in. Sally, I'll leave you with the last word on ED because I know you have a lot to say on it. But you can take us out, and then we'll go to the final segment.
Okay. I mean, I kind of had my say about my opinion about highly selective colleges, but the thing that I'll say about when I'm talking to students is I know you think this college is perfect for you, but it isn't. It's a very, very good school. It's a wonderful place. But when you get there, you will find things you don't like about it, and you
Yes.
need to be ready for that. And so I really want to leave students with that. As happy as I was in college, I wasn't happy with 100% of everything. And that was the same thing for my friends who went to Ivy League schools. So that's the other thing. Like, it's early for you to determine what's perfect for you as well.
That's right.
So, yeah.
It's a big choice. Try not to be committed too early, right? That's great. When we come back, we're going to do a final little segment. It's going to be a shorter one, but we're just going to wrap up with some of our thoughts on the book specifically, whether it's worth picking up, if it's something that might be helpful for you and your family to read. So we'll be back with that third segment. Don't go away.